Hello, class. It is Tuesday, April 28th, and we're in our Bible class. So today we're going to start a new chapter, chapter 22, and we're going to talk about Daniel and his faithfulness. Daniel is faithful. Our memory verse is Psalm 138 and 3. So, on the day I called, you answered me. My strength of soul you increased. That's our memory verse. And our glossary word is faithfulness. We'll talk about faithfulness. Let's go to our glossary and let's look up faithfulness. Okay. So, faithfulness just means constant loyalty. That means you're true to something, you're faithful to it. Okay, so Daniel makes godly decisions when faced with negative consequences. Sometimes you're faced with some negative consequences, but you have to make a godly decision about it. So God gives Daniel the ability to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So you're going to make good choices and identify scripture verses that show faithfulness to God. You're going to recall and recount selected portions of the Bible truth. You're going to demonstrate an understanding of prayer and identify ways to help lead others to make right choices. So, faithfulness, meaning true to God even in the face of adversities, can be extremely difficult at times. It helps to remember that God is faithful and can never be anything but faithful. Hudson Taylor worked to bring the gospel to China in the 1800s. As one of China's pioneer missionaries, he was able to accomplish much by trusting in God's faithfulness. He said, holding his faithfulness, he may go into every province of China, and holding his faithfulness, we may face with calm and sober but confident assurance of victory every difficulty and danger. Let us not give him a partial trust, but daily, hourly serve him. So, our song for this week, for this chapter, is Great is Thy Faithfulness. I want you to listen to that when you get a chance. Great is Thy Faithfulness. Some of you already know the song, you already know the words, but to those that don't, it's a wonderful song to think about, and it makes you feel, it's a feel-good song. Great is Thy Faithfulness. You want to be faithful to God. Okay, so I want you to do something. I'm going to say some words that I do not want you to use, and I'll tell you why. Don't use these words. The, my, and, it, and is. Do not use those words. The, I'm going to write them down for you. The, my, and, it, and is. Look at these words. I don't want you to use these words, and I'll tell you why. Now, here's when you're not going to use these words. You're going to think of a sentence about your friends without using these words that I just wrote down. Okay? How difficult is it to come up with a sentence about your friends and you can't use any of these words? That's really, really difficult. It was difficult even for me. Choosing not to use the forbidden words showed that you had resolve. So resolve is a determination to do or not do something. In today's Bible truth, Daniel and his friends showed resolve to remain faithful to God. So we looked up faithfulness, which means constant loyalty. In today's Bible truth, It took a lot of boldness for Daniel and his friends to be faithful to God. Okay, let me read you a Bible truth paraphrase from Daniel 1, chapter 1. Long ago, the city of Jerusalem was invaded by the king of Babylon and his army. The king's name was Nebuchadnezzar. When the king took over Jerusalem, he captured many of the Jewish people who lived there and took them to Babylon. Daniel and three of his friends were some of those taken captive. They were teenagers when they were taken from their homes and made to go live in the king's palace. When David and the three boys arrived in Babylon, the king chose them to be his very special servants and gave them each a new name. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, and Daniel's friends were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. For 3 years, the boys would study the Babylonian language and learn all the wisdom of the land. When they finished their training, they would spend the rest of their lives serving the king as wise men, advisors close to the king. So Daniel and his three friends had been raised to be faithful to God, to worship God only, and to obey his laws. As part of their training, King Nebuchadnezzar required them to eat foods that were forbidden by God's law. The four boys now had a choice: to be faithful to God or to please the king. They chose to be faithful to God. Now, Daniel boldly asked permission for himself and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to eat only vegetables and to drink only water for 10 days. At the end of that time, if they looked any worse than the others who were also in training, they would agree to eat the king's food. So, for 10 days, Daniel and his friends ate only vegetables and drank only water. At the end of those days, they looked better than all the other boys. As a result, they were given permission to keep eating the food listed in God's law. So God honored the boldness and faithfulness of Daniel and his friends. He blessed them and gave them special abilities to learn and understand all the things they needed to know to serve the king. When all the new servants appeared before King Nebuchadnezzar, none compared to Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Daniel and his friends were taken captive together, and together they boldly decided to remain faithful to God. Their unity helped them make a choice to follow God's ways. Okay, so let's look at page 85. We're going to do that one in class today. Daniel is faithful. Daniel and his friends showed resolve. That means, you're going to do something or you're not going to do it. They faithfully decided to make godly choices. Circle the godly choices you can make. I would circle obey my parents, read the Bible, exercise. That's always good for us. Listen to my teacher, speak the truth, and be nice to my cousins. So number 2, look up the verses below with a partner. You can do this with your mother, your brother, your sister, your grandparents, your whomever. So decide if the people showed faithfulness or unfaithfulness to God. Place an X in the correct box. Moses in Exodus 4:19 and 20. So you can do these together with your parents. Most of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay. Nehemiah 2:18. Okay. So I'm going to tell you, and the first one, Moses, he was faithful to God, wasn't he? Yes, he was. We remember that. We read that a long time ago, but we do remember Moses was faithful to God in Exodus. So we would say faithful. We would put an X in the box, in the faithful box. And most of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, we read about Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18:20 and 19:29. We know they were very wicked people. They were doing all kinds of things. So they were unfaithful to God. And also Nehemiah, remember we read about Nehemiah, and Nehemiah was faithful to God. Yes, he was. So we would check that box, put an X there. Okay, how did Daniel and his friends show faithfulness to God? By not wanting to eat food forbidden by God's law, by following God's way of eating. And so, how did Daniel show boldness? He asked that he and his friends be allowed to eat only vegetable and drink water for 10 days. That was very bold of him because the king could have said no and really did some harm to them. So, what was the result of the boys' faithfulness in eating foods listed in God's law? They looked better than all the others. So, sometimes you have to step out on faith. You should always step out on faith and do what God requires us to do, and only do that thing no matter where you are and what you're faced with. Okay, so I want you to tell about a time when God has shown faithfulness to you. You can tell a friend, you can tell your parents, you can tell brothers and sisters, whomever, grandparents. So tell about a time when you showed faithfulness to God. It's your answer. There is no right or wrong answer. So why is it important to show faithfulness to God? Some possible answers is he wants to have a relationship with you. He wants you to obey because you love him. God has been faithful to you. Daniel and his friends were bold to request not to eat the king's food. When have you shown boldness? So you think about it. Sometimes all of your friends may be doing one thing and then you say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what thus saith the Lord. And so I am not going to do that, what you're doing. Okay. So Daniel was taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar when he was around 15 years old. And this all happened before Esther became queen. Daniel and Esther lived close in time to each other in history. Both chose to serve and follow the one true God. Okay, that is the end of our lesson for today. I really enjoyed that lesson and I hope you did too.